Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University Night School. I'm Jeff Pearson. I'm here with my co-host, Stephen White. Hello, Stephen. How are you doing this evening?
Pretty good, Jeff. So the basis of today's topic, which is child safety and how it concerns landlords, kind of perfectly coincides with a phone call that we had just gotten that I took, and a blog article that was written specifically on safety tips for youngest tenants or children is what it's for. The phone call that I took was interesting though because it was from a landlord who said that she was, in a rural area, had a septic system, well water, and she was ultimately concerned with the children drinking the water and said that it's not safe, and I don't want them to drink the water, and I don't want them to end up drinking it and getting sick, and then I'm somehow responsible for it. So, do you have an addendum or a form that you can provide me that tells them they can't drink the water, or at least that they acknowledge that I've told them this. The parents can sign it, and we didn't have that form. It was so specific. I'd never seen one before, and so I gave her some advice on where to go. NOLO was one of the resources I said you might want to check out. Also, her own, her county. In a lot of cases, if you're in a rural area and you're dealing with an issue like that, chances are somebody else has dealt with it. Somebody else has an addendum. The county maybe has provided it. So that's never a bad idea to go to the county, see what they have, see what kind of resources they have for you too for certain very specific forms like that.
Right.
But it definitely brought up a good topic of child safety and landlord responsibility. And like I said, it kind of just coincided perfectly with the blog article that we had just put out covering the same thing ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are some basic things that you have to make sure you take care of. Yeah, when it comes to stairs and landings, there are state and local codes that you have to be sure that your railings are the appropriate height and the distance between them are the appropriate distances and things like that. And you have to make sure that you've met those basic standards legally. But a lot of this other stuff that is addressed in the article is the type of stuff that that we as parents and as people, landlords who want to be sure that we're providing the best experience for our tenants and their guests as possible is like another step up. And it's a lot of good information.
Yeah, and another point to be made is it could be a great marketing point too. If you're in an area that your unit may be attractive to families, young families. There's certain, we've covered topics before on attracting millennials by updating technologies in the house, things like that. There's also things that you can do to attract young families. You can't,
Yes.
obviously it's discrimination. You can't write it in your ad that you're looking for a young family to move in, but they're going to spot a lot of things that they're going to point out and say, wow, this is great. This is a perfect unit for a child. And, this is exactly what we're looking for. So there's two pieces to this. There's two really good benefits. One is you're creating a really safe environment. Two, you're creating something that's going to be attractive to the type of people that you may be trying to get in there.
Exactly. So, just to run through the list kind of quickly, stair safety, certainly you want to be sure that your rails and banisters are all legal, that they meet the minimum standards for your community. And I would say, even if your unit is grandfathered with some older law, I would do everything possible to upgrade to the new laws, because the new laws take into account kids' ability to stick their heads through rails and, or slip through and fall. And even though you might fall under an older law that lets you keep it the way it is, if it doesn't meet that minimum standard, I can't imagine knowing that it's there and not fixing it. So I would suggest make those improvements. But certainly if you've got stairs that are kind of slippery, if they're wood or linoleum or something, and it makes sense to add some no slip strips. I would certainly do that. Motion sensor lights, in this day and age with all of the LED lights and stuff like that, you can really make your place look nice by providing some of those motion sensor lights and maybe some additional lighting. Again, that steps up your property.
Absolutely.
But the one I really wanted to be sure to talk about is garage door sensors. For many years, garage door sensors have been sold with automatic locks that if your garage door hits an object, it should stop and raise back up, because the last thing you want is for a kid to fall and be trapped under that garage door. So I would make sure that you test that garage door. And there are certainly a lot of places on the web that you can find that will show you how to properly test to make sure that your sensor is working properly. And there's two things. One, there's the sensor that if you break it while the door is going down, it's going to go back up. The other is if you put something underneath it that doesn't break the sensor, it should, when it meets that resistance, it should stop and go back up without causing damage to a person or a pet. So I would make sure to test that. Cabinet door locks, if you know that you have a tenant moving in that has toddlers, you could talk with them about offering cabinet door locks. They're not that expensive, and it's certainly going to make your tenant be very appreciative of the fact that you're thinking about them and their kids. Toilet locks, if you've got the young toddlers, it makes sense to put a lock on there so that they don't trouble with the toilet. Window screen latches, certainly could help provide window screen latches so that the kids can't get through the window. Smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, these fall more under the line of things that you must do. And certainly in California, carbon monoxide detectors now are as required as smoke detectors. And I would assume that even if the law in your area doesn't require it, you should consider it a requirement for yourself, because you would hate to have some type of a carbon monoxide poisoning situation where it could have been prevented just by having one of those detectors. It's very simple.
Yeah, it was just passed in New York recently too, and
Was
it
it?
was because of a child fatality, and real sad. Obviously deadly silent killer. You'll never know. So, well worth keeping that in there for sure.
And if you don't have it in your own home, be sure to add it to your own home as well.
Yeah, no
They're
doubt.
not that expensive. Secure fencing, and I would go back to the thoughts about the banisters. If you've got some fencing outside that maybe has some pretty wide spaces, make sure that it's either wide enough that it's not an issue, so that a child can't get stuck in it, or that it's narrow enough that it fixes the problem. And there are certainly ways that you could put something on top of a fence or a gate that doesn't provide enough security or safety to a child, that you could do it at very little cost. But going back to what you were talking about, Steve, about making your property more valuable to millennials, if you have a nice yard with nice fencing, very often they have pets or they have kids, and they're looking for that. So
Yeah.
you can provide more value to your tenants, and thus your property will become more valuable. Blind cords, however you want to say that. If you have blinds, make sure that you have all of the proper accessories to be able to tie those cords up. And I think there are even some laws starting to come into effect, but I can't remember offhand, about how you can use those cords on the blinds. And
hmm
what it seems to me, you have to have ties, something, just a piece of hardware on a cleat, as we call it in boating parlance,
Right.
that you can tie it to so that it's not hanging, so that the kids can't choke on that. And lead-based paint, that's a tough one, but I think it's incumbent upon every landlord to test their units for lead-based paints. And it's a pretty easy test. You can take some samples of paint from a couple of different places and send it in, and they can tell you whether or not you have lead-based paint. Depending on the laws in your area, I think in most places you're okay if you don't have peeling or exposed paint. But if you know that you have lead paint, then you can be that much more careful to be sure that all of your paint is that there are no peeling or scratching there that would
Yeah.
allow the kids to get to it. Even if you're using a water-based paint. And very often the trim is where you're going to really see it, around your windows and doors. Make sure that you know about it whether or not it's lead-based paint, and then you probably need to be sure that your tenants know we do have lead-based paint, but all of the exposed paint is latex paint, and as long as it's not chipping or cracking, the kids can't get to it, something to that effect.
Yeah, and legally, you're then required, you have to give them a lead-based paint disclosure.
Yes.
So protect yourself, obviously, that you're making them aware. And there's a little safety pamphlet that gives them information, and we carry it on RentPrep.com for free. So landlords can obtain it there, and it's the standard U.S. lead-based paint disclosure. So always good to have that, and make sure you're doing it. And it's funny, Jeff, as you're going through this list, every single one of these things are all things that I'm thinking from the perspective, of a showing. So let's say that you're going through as a landlord and you're showing a place to, a nice young family, and they're, that's sort of the ideal tenant that you're looking for. These are all things that are going to make the property that much more appealing. Every one of them.
Exactly. Yes.
So, it really does behoove you to do any of these things and all of these things to help, increase not only safety, but appeal.
That's right. Very good things to pay a lot of attention to.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up another episode of Night School, and I look forward to talking with you tomorrow evening.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University, and remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at thementorimpact.com.